Welcome to the show, folks. This is Wrestling Changed My Life. Here we go.
If you've wrestled, you've been pushed to a place. You've been in some deep water before,
Mm-hmm.
and you probably didn't swim every time either. That's always the thing, right? Like we like to romanticize all these things, but the reality is most of the time, the first time any of us are out deep water, our ass is drowned.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestled, because if you wrestled, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
If I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if it gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
Welcome to Wrestling Changed My Life, folks. This is your host, Ryan Warner. My guest today is Iowa football offensive coordinator Brian Ferentz. Before that, he was a coach for the Patriots. He's an NFL player, and obviously, he wrestled back in the day. He wrestled in high school. And what I love about this podcast is Brian, one, is a huge wrestling fan, but two, he talks about why Iowa football loves recruiting wrestlers. And as you can imagine, it's not all about the skill set. It has a lot to do with the mindset. And I hope you enjoy this one, folks. Fan of the week goes to Stetson Ayers. His pops, Caleb, turned him onto the show, and now he's a listener. Thank you for listening, Stetson. I appreciate it. Last but not least, this episode is brought to you by Competitor Supreme, which is a Dan Gable movie from the 90s. When I was a kid, I watched this thing over and over and over, and I couldn't find it online. But now you can stream it on WrestlingChangeMyLife.com. Just go to WrestlingChangeMyLife.com and click on the tab Competitor Supreme and use the promo code GABLE, G-A-B-L-E, for a free rental. It's normally $2, but if you use the promo code GABLE, G-A-B-L-E, you'll get a free rental. And that's it, folks. Let's give it up for Brian Ferentz. I know you wrestled at City High. Was Brad Smith your coach?
Brad Smith coached me.
Yep.
So I was at City High from 2000. The wrestling seasons would have been 99, 2000, and 2000, 2001.
Okay.
And before we came to Iowa City, my first 2 years of high school wrestling were at the Gilman School in Baltimore. So probably the most, I'd say the most famous alum of the Gilman School is a guy named Mike Faust. I don't know if you've ever heard that name. He actually wrestled for Tom at Virginia Tech.
Oh, wow.
Off a transfer. He started at Penn, and then he wrestled at heavyweight for Tom. He was actually my introduction to wrestling. I didn't grow up wrestling because once we left Iowa, I was 7 years old, and we went to Maine. There's not a lot of wrestling in Maine. Okay, so either you play hockey or you kill yourself. Those are the two things that Maine's known for. That's a terrible thing to say, and it's no laughing matter, but they are the highest, at least when we were there, highest suicide rate per capita in the United States.
Really?
It is an interesting place, but hockey is king in Maine.
Yeah.
So when we went to, I was kind of a nomad in the winter sport world as a kid. I played hockey when we lived in Maine, and I was at a disadvantage. I started skating at the age of 7. Most kids there are skating really before they can even walk. So that was a little bit hard. Then we moved to Ohio. We followed my father around, obviously. So we moved to Ohio. In Ohio, I continued to play hockey, but it was not like it was in Maine. In Maine, hockey is king. In Ohio, it's a club sport. So by our second or third year in Ohio, hockey just wasn't really feasible for me. We left. We went to Baltimore. after that. So I'm in like 7th grade, not playing hockey anymore. I played basketball growing up in all the youth leagues. Nothing crazy. I wasn't much of a basketball player. But we get to Baltimore. I played basketball. I played football and basketball in 8th grade. Baseball. Those were my 3 sports. And baseball is a spring sport everywhere I grew up except Iowa. In Iowa, it's a summer sport. So in Iowa, you can actually play 4 sports as a high school athlete.
That's right. Yeah.
So 8th grade, I do that. And then in 9th grade, I move over to the school, the Gilman School. It's a private school. It was a great experience for me. Best thing ever happened to me, though. So I played football there. And after the football season at Gilman, you had to participate in a sport all 3 seasons. You were on trimesters, and in each trimester, part of the curriculum was you had to play a sport or do some kind of intramural. So we get to the winter. I go out for the basketball team, and let's say my heart wasn't in it. So they cut me, and I remember I had to do something in the winter. And this guy, Mike Faust, who played football, we played football together. Grew up wrestling. He was a pretty big time prep wrestler. Won national preps twice, I think. That was a big tournament for us. Like, there was no state tournament for private schools out there, so you would go to national preps. I remember being on the other side of the bracket of Steve Mocco. We never saw each other, thankfully for me. That was my sophomore year at Lehigh, but he got me to go out for wrestling. And I'd never wrestled before in my life, right? So I'm a first-time wrestler in 9th grade, and I really just fell in love with it. I really very much enjoyed it. I had no idea what I was doing. Wrestled JV my first year and tried to learn how to wrestle. But from there was really no turning back. And then my family's a little different. My younger brothers grew up wrestling.
Gotcha.
Because we moved here when I was a junior in high school, and my younger brothers, my next brother's 6 years younger than me. So he's right away in an elementary school, and he's Mat Pack with Brad, wrestling. City High's kids club's called Mat Pack, and then my youngest brother's 10 years younger than me, so he's right into Mat Pack with Brad too. And then that's where my story starts at City High. I get there as a junior, and get a chance to join Brad's team.
Yeah, I love the background there, and I appreciate it. It just makes you realize, you see the head coaches on Saturdays coaching, or even the assistants or anyone in that staff. It's like, man, that's such a glorious job. But how hard is that on the family life to move around like that? That's brutal.
It's tough, and you think about that now, getting into it with your kids. I've got 4 little ones. You may hear them in the background. This quarantine is, there's not a lot of privacy in our house, and we got a pretty good sized house. But yeah, you think about that. But I'll tell you what, I think you look at it 2 ways, and it's probably like a lot of people have talked about just with the sport on your program here. Growing up that way, you have 2 choices. You can either sit around, feel sorry for yourself, and talk about how hard it is. It's really not. A lot of people move a lot, and I think it's a tremendous opportunity because I got experience with a lot of different people in a lot of different regions of the country, and I had to start over a couple of times. And although that seemed very hard when I was young, I think I gained some real skills that have helped me as I've become an adult. And moving around, being different places, meeting different people, having to start over, having to do it once in 8th grade and once in high school. I think that was really beneficial for me because those are times when the pecking order and the social order is really entrenched.
Yeah.
And bang, you're thrust in a new environment, and it's like the wrestling community, right? High school boys, there's a certain there's alphas, and they work really hard to establish their position. And then all of a sudden, when you come in, and I was always a bigger kid growing up, so you're an immediate threat to everybody. What I did find helpful was, whether it was wrestling or football or baseball, being a part of organized team sports always gave me kind of ready-made friends. It earned you acceptance probably a little bit quicker than if you're just a new kid in school. So
absolutely,
I look back and look. If you'd asked the 13-year-old version of me, I would have told you how terrible it was and how awful it was. But in reality, when you're 13 years old, you have no perspective. I sit here at 37 and say, boy, I was really fortunate to have grown up the way I grew up. But my youngest brother, he went from K to 12 in one city, in Iowa City. So,
Yeah.
We grew up very different ways, and I'd argue he's probably a little more well-adjusted than me. So perhaps that's the best way to do it.
One of my favorite stories that I found when I was researching for this podcast is your dad had taken that head coaching job at Iowa, and you were in high school, and his first 2 years he was rebuilding and transitioning, and I think they had lost to Central Michigan at home or Western Michigan at home, and you go up to him and you're like, Dad, are we going to have to move again? And he's like, no, we're going to be fine. And he was like, lockstep confidence, no doubt. And then the next year they go 7-5, win the Alamo Bowl, and the rest is history. But do you remember that conversation, and what do you take from that to this day?
I do. So you're exactly right. It was Western Michigan. It was 2000, and the best way I could describe that is, these games happen every year. They happen every year, and it's like competing in anything. That's why you compete. There's no they seed tournaments, but you got to go wrestle them.
Mm-hmm.
And football's the same way. So these upsets happen all the time. But again, I hark back to, okay, I'm 17 years old, and I think part of my problem at 17 was I probably didn't have a healthy respect for what it does take to win when you compete. But the bottom line was we lost to a team that you should never lose to at home. Now, interestingly enough, we lost to Western Michigan about 7 years later at home when we really had no business losing to them. And Central Michigan, who you brought up, we lost to them in 2012 at home. So, we've lost plenty of these games. But for me, it was just kind of one of those moments where, I'd grown up in a world where the University of Iowa, we beat everybody except Michigan and Ohio State, and those were going to be close games. So to see us on such hard times, boy, that was tough on me. And then, you add to that the fact that there weren't a lot of wins in those first 2 years, and that's early in the second year. So, the first year we go 1-10, and it's bad, but hey, it's the first year and it's rebuilding. Okay, as a 17-year-old, I can understand that. Year two, we opened the season in Kansas City against Nebraska, who at that time was still Nebraska. And we were competitive, it was like a 38-17 game or something like that. We weren't close, but we weren't totally outclassed. And then we go home and we lose to Western Michigan. So in my naive 17-year-old mindset, I think that, hey, we're just going to go out and year two, we're going to get this thing squared away. And I had no respect for what it takes to win, the process, all those things. So I'm pretty upset. And I say to my father afterwards, are we going to be okay? And, what really struck me is he actually didn't say everything's going to be okay. He told me, looked me in the eye and he told me, he said, hey, he goes, I don't know. He said, I don't know, but we're doing everything the only way I know how. We're going to work every day. We're making improvement. We're making progress. This is a process. I know how to do things one way. That's how we're going to do them. And I can live with the results. And now it wasn't doom and gloom. He said it in a way that to a 17-year-old there was a lot of confidence in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's stuck with me my whole life. You probably found it in one of those stories. I reference that story often because, and whether it's wrestling, football, I laugh because my father has no background in wrestling, but very much appreciates the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And he would have been a great wrestler because he's marginally talented athletically, but he's extremely tough and tough-minded.
Mm-hmm.
And for a 17-year-old to get that kind of guidance at home where, hey, look, I don't know if everything's going to be okay. But that's okay. It's okay to fail if you do it the right way or if you do your best, to sound really cheesy. I think that's what he was telling me. Now, I hope he had no intention of failing, I hope.
Right.
But I think that's really powerful for a 17-year-old to understand that, if you're going to accomplish anything that's of any kind of, difficulty, you have to be willing to take a chance. You have to be willing to risk humiliation, to risk failure, to go out and do that.
Yeah. No, and people who listen to this show are going to shoot themselves because I mention this all the time, but John Wooden's one of my heroes, and I've read his book, I can't remember what it's called. It's like this little tiny blue book, but
Sure.
he defines success in that same way, right? He doesn't even need to know the outcome of the game because based on that week's worth of practice, he'll know if they've had success or not by doing the right things. You know.
Yeah. Well, I know exactly what book you're referencing.
Yeah.
And it's as good as it gets, right? It's simple, it's direct, but it's exactly right. And I think, whether you're talking about wrestling or our business in football, preparation is going to be 95% of what determines success or failure. And then there's that aspect of, but again, so much of it comes in. That's why I'm always fascinated by like what Tom and Terry do over there, because I think that in their sport, you're always looking to February and March, and it can be very difficult to manage the expectations of a season as you look towards something so far away. And most people, with all due respect, but even our fans who are the most knowledgeable fans in the world when it comes to wrestling, or at least on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, I think, this side of the Cold War for sure, I don't think they can always grasp that, what you're watching in Carver Hawkeye or what you're watching in a dual meet during the year, that's not going to be that athlete's best performance. It can't be if they're working towards what's really important. And that's the hard part about football is we only get 12 of those opportunities. We get one a week. So all that preparation that goes in during the week, if you can't maximize that performance on Saturday, that's the other 5% of the equation. And it's usually not that tricky, but I gotta be honest with you, I can't imagine, or I really can't recall, honestly, too many times where, boy, we had a great week of preparation, and we just shit the bed.
Right.
Pardon my French,
no
but
problem.
I can't really recall more than one or two of those, and those are head scratchers. But typically, I know going into the game, I got a pretty good idea of what I think is going to happen, and I'm rarely wrong. And sometimes that's not a good thing. Sometimes you know what's going to happen before it happens, and that's not good.
Well, you talk about preparation, and when I was thinking about how different it is to interview you since you're a college football coach versus some of the wrestlers, I think of, hours and hours of preparation. And obviously, you got to learn from one of the great masters of all time, Bill Belichick. Talk about what level of detail in preparation goes into something like the Patriots organization? And if they have a game Sunday, when does it start? Is it Sunday night? Is it Monday? What does that look like in a typical week?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's year round. It's 12 months a year. That's one thing that I think all athletic endeavors share. And I really respect. In fact, if you interviewed some of our players, they probably get tired of my wrestling references, right? Especially whether it's our program, or whether it's just wrestling in general. But one thing that to me, and I've heard Tom Brands talk about this a lot, and I know it's not Tom's original thought, and I think it all probably stems back to Coach Gable. But if you're going to be a winner, you have to live a championship lifestyle. I've heard Tom talk about that a lot. And when he talks about a championship lifestyle, he's talking about it's 365 days a year. And you can't wake up one day and decide that you're going to be great at anything. You have to make that choice. You have to commit to it. And you have to live that way 12 months a year for as long as you choose to compete. I think what the New England Patriots probably do better than anybody in the world in our sport is adhere to those principles. I've heard Bill Belichick say basically the same thing with different words. And I think the interesting thing about football is it becomes a little bit more difficult because if you're in the NFL, you're talking about a roster with 53 guys on it. If you're in college football, you have 85 scholarship players, plus another walk-on population. We're probably going to carry close to 120 guys a year. Getting everybody in tune is harder. And, whereas in wrestling, if you're going to have a good wrestling program, you're talking about 15 to 20 guys that you've got to get on board, which can still be very challenging.
Yeah.
The Patriots year round are committed to that. And then just the way that a football week looks, again, that's where it's so much different than wrestling. You're preparing year round for the season, but once you get into the games, what you're really talking about now is, okay, Sunday you compete, or in our business, or in college football Saturday, and it's basically the same model. Saturday night, you try to digest whatever happened, and Sunday morning you relive it. So you go and you do your postmortem, you watch the tape, you talk about why things worked, didn't work, what was successful, what wasn't. Then you're with the players addressing that. So in the NFL, that's Monday. You're going to watch that film with the players. You're going to try to get things cleaned up with them, make corrections. Then you're going to get them out of the building, and by Monday night, you're going to be starting on Sunday's opponent, and you're going to kind of break the. Football is so situational, so you're going to segment it. Hey, we're talking about first and second down, normal down and distance. Then maybe the next day we're talking about some red areas, some third down. So you go, basically Tuesday's a game planning day. The players don't work. Wednesday you're practicing. Thursday you're practicing. Friday you're practicing. Saturday you're practicing to some extent. You're gearing down that physical, the physicality part of it. By Friday and Saturday you're really backing off. And then Sunday, obviously, it's game day again, and you got to start all over again that night. But I think one thing, you bring up one interesting thing about football. To me, once you get into the season, basically you spend about 8 months. That's why what we're going through right now in every sport is interesting.
Yeah.
But we're going to get to a point here where we have a lot of football coaches out there that should not be talking to the media based on what I've read. The reality of what's going to happen here is we're going to reach a date where safety is going to become an issue as far as just ramping guys up, getting them ready to go out and play. Because we're used to having 52 weeks a year to make sure these guys are ready to play. So you spend 8 months getting ready to play, getting guys big, strong, fast. And then essentially you spend 4 months trying the hardest you possibly can to keep them there. And so a lot of times when we talk about in our building, and again, I think the Patriots do this very well, Sunday to Sunday in the NFL or Saturday to Saturday in college football, it's really about how much recovery can you make? How quickly can you get guys' bodies back? Because there's going to be a period in the middle of the week where you have to go out and work again. And it's physical, and there's nothing easy about that. And then at what point do you start backing off of that to get them to ready to play on Saturday or Sunday at the highest level? And those are the things that we're trying to deal with.
Man, so it's just not, and you kind of knew it was nonstop, but at that level, any elite level of football during that season, that 7-day period is just nonstop.
Yeah, it's about, for the players, it's about 4 months, really probably closer to 5 months if you're a good team. Of just nonstop, and the toll is physical. Which becomes mental, and it's like any sport. That's one thing I always think about in my life. I was so fortunate to wrestle.
Yeah.
Because I know it's so overused. Coach Gable's quote about once you've wrestled, anything in life is easy. But I really believe that. I think there's a lot of truth to that because there aren't many sports. If you're a football player, just for example, we try to stress this to our guys all the time. There's 11 guys on the field. And what's amazing about football is 10 guys can do it right. 1 guy can do it wrong, and it can get you beat. Or 1 guy can do it right, 10 guys can do it wrong, and you can get away with it because only the 1 guy was, vulnerable. So what's interesting about that is it's very difficult to be the actual GOAT in a football game, to be the guy they point at. And often you can deflect blame, you can deflect criticism. It's one thing I've learned in coaching. The first thing you need to do when you don't have a result that you want is own it and be accountable to that result, because otherwise you're not going to make any progress. But if you don't grow up in a sport like wrestling where it's you and the other guy, and that's it. There's 2 people competing on the mat, and there's nowhere to hide. So whatever that result is out there, you own that. And if you end up on your back in front of a lot of people, it is a humbling experience. And I don't think anybody that's ever had that experience in life, let me put it this way. I watch a lot of our leaders. Obviously, right now, we're all seeing more news coverage than any of us would ever care to see.
Yeah.
I think it would do a lot of people really well to get their ass kicked in front of 6,000 people in a gym. It may give them a little bit of humility that's probably needed to do some of the things we need to do right now.
Amen, man. I couldn't agree more. And, I tried to kind of distill some of your philosophies just based on what I read about you, but self-awareness seems to be a big one. And you've talked about that a lot. But getting back to wrestling, I mean, you guys did the Wrestling World Proud this year, where I think all of your offensive linemen, all 5, wrestled in high school, and that meme or that picture was everywhere for about 2 months,
sure,
which was awesome. So do you? Not that you would intentionally recruit a wrestler, but when you're recruiting guys, you have, to me, 85 scholarships seems like a lot, so you have a lot of room to play with, but you probably think it's not enough. But, what are you looking for in recruits? And if they happen to wrestle, is that like a bonus, or kind of what do you look for in terms of like people's skills, not football skills?
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's an excellent question, because the question you're asking is a lot more important than the football skills.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're out there and you're trying to evaluate guys, 85 scholarships is a lot. But again, you're talking about a sport where we have 22 guys that are on the field at any given moment. It's a lot compared to other sports.
Mm-hmm.
Let me put it that way. And when you're evaluating guys, I always start from this spot with us. If you look at recruiting rankings, which come out every February, you're never going to see us in the top 15.
Mm-hmm.
You're just not. And I could probably give you the teams that are going to be in the top 15 every year. I may not get the order exactly right, but I'll be pretty close. If you look at the rankings that come out at the end of the season, we expect to be in the top 15 every year.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you bridge that gap, right? And why can't, the first question that I get all the time from fans, and I know it's a frustration, well, why can't you just go recruit the top 15 class? If it was that easy, we'd be doing it. I can tell you that much right now. And in some ways, stars and all that stuff is valid. Wrestling, football, any of that. If I take my wife to a wrestling match in Carver Hawkeye Arena right now, she knows that Spencer Lee is the best wrestler in the building. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
It's not hard to see, right? What she can't understand is when I'm watching us wrestle, and I'm watching some of our young guys like Cassiopeia early in the year, and I'm going, we walk out of there, and she's like, "What do you think?" I was like, "I think we have a heavyweight. Like, I like this kid." She's like, "Well, what do you mean?" Because he's wrestling heavyweight matches, especially early in the year. It wasn't real explosive. But I just said, here's a kid. I just like the way I like his approach. I like how he handles himself. I like how he handles things that don't go his way. I like how he continues to wrestle through some positions.
Mm-hmm.
Just some things that, and football is no different, right? I'm not an expert in the technical aspects of wrestling. But when you're looking at football players, I think that's more important than anything. How are they handling themselves? Okay, so then now you bring it all together with that wrestling equation. When you're talking about what we would call big or semi-athletes, so offense and defensive linemen, linebackers, tight ends, those kind of guys, if they have a wrestling background, I think it helps them for all the reasons I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never even worried if they're any good or not. Now, most of our guys were pretty good, because I would just make the observation. That's why I look back on my high school career with such shame. Most heavyweight divisions in high school wrestling across the country, statewide, are not that competitive.
Right.
So if you're a big guy that's tough and physical and semi-athletic, you should do pretty well regardless of your wrestling skills.
Mm-hmm.
So most of our guys are pretty good. I remember Tom said one year we had 5 guys in our room, or 4 guys that he thought could be national place winners.
Wow.
At heavyweight. But it's the same problem, right? We have guys that should be playing for us and should be All-Americans, but they're playing, Division II basketball because their AAU coach thought, that being a 6'4" guy that can't shoot, there was a future in that. So it's kind of the same thing. But when you're looking at those guys, if you have a guy with a wrestling background, Generally, it's not 100%, but generally I can make some assumptions about that kid and what kind of kid he is, and more importantly, what he's been exposed to. Because, like you talked about, whether it's self-awareness, which, look, when we're 17 years old, we all lack that. It's just normal. But in my life, it's amazing. And you could probably, you've been around a lot more of the wrestling community than I have. I'm very local in the wrestling community. I'm around Iowa, which is good enough for me. That's all I want, because everybody else is the bad guys anyway. So what's amazing to me, I've been around very few arrogant wrestlers, if that makes sense. Very few. Look, every profession, every sport, we all have some bad apples. But I'll tell you what, I've been around a lot of arrogant football players. I've been around a lot of arrogant coaches. I think there's a humility that comes with having to wrestle that it can't be duplicated anywhere else. And so everybody talks about leverage and all those things. And hey, that's one thing about wrestlers. Generally, if you spend any time in a wrestling room, you start to learn how the human body works, how to apply pressure, and how to, win leverage battles. But it's so much more than that. I think it has a lot more to do with the mindset and the mentality of kids. And generally, if you've wrestled, you've been pushed to a place. You've been in some deep water before, and you probably didn't swim every time either. That's always the thing, right? Like we like to romanticize all these things, but the reality is most of the time, the first time any of us are out deep water, our ass is drowned.
Yeah.
And then, we have a great coach, like a guy like Brad Smith, who, boy, I look back, how fortunate was I in high school to be coached like a guy by the name of Brad Smith. And then, I had some coaches in college and football that are legendary in our profession. But a guy like Brad Smith, they put you in that deep water, they let you drown, and then they pull you back up. They tell you it's okay, and they teach you how to swim. And I think most kids with wrestling backgrounds have had a similar experience to that. The thing I tell guys in recruiting, I can't promise you anything. Anybody that promises you anything in recruiting, you should run as fast as you can the other way. Now, unfortunately, most kids, they like promises. But the only thing I can promise you is that this is going to be hard. If you want to be a great college football player, it's going to be hard. Yeah. If you want to play in the NFL, that's going to be hard. If you want to get a college degree, that's going to be hard. There are things that are going to happen that you didn't expect, that you didn't plan for, and quite frankly, that you didn't want. And guess what? A lot of them are going to be unfair. And no one is going to care. Right. No one is going to care. So are you going to push through those things? Do you have the fortitude to see things through? Do you have a goal that is so important to you that you are willing to push through difficulty and uncomfortability to get there? Kids from a wrestling background have already had a lot of experience with things like that. And the disappointment, I think about the disappointment that I've been around in the wrestling world, whether it was my own as a competitor and how alone and empty that feeling is, or, sitting there trying to counsel my brothers when they face the same disappointment, and how just devastating and shattering it is. Me personally, I'd rather have kids playing for us that have been through things like that than, just been handed trophies their whole life.
Coach, I'm impressed with your wrestling knowledge. You're dropping names. I didn't know what to expect coming in, like how up to date you were with the Hawkeyes, man. And
I follow those closely. Yeah, it's my favorite pastime.
Well, I gotta say, I couldn't agree with you more. When you have a goal and you've done everything that you can do right and you still don't get it, that's where it hurts the worst. And a lot of people never experience that until they get to the real world. They're 28, 29, 30, and then shit hits the fan and it's chaos, right? So doing everything right, like any of those Iowa guys do, and not getting it done, there's nothing more gut-wrenching to see. And a lot of times when I have guys on here, I'll ask them, talk to me about your transition from high school to college or from college to the Olympics. One of the things I was dying to ask you, just because you've been around football your whole life, what was it like transitioning from college to the NFL? I know you were only there for a year, but what was that like, and what is the level of athleticism in the NFL? Is it just unreal?
Yeah, so I always kid around. It's a good question. I always tell people the best thing about me having an NFL experience was that I realized very quickly I didn't belong there. You know, in all seriousness, it's a surreal experience to join the NFL as a player. And I even hesitate to say I spent a year on a practice squad, and then I spent a preseason with a couple teams and got cut, and that was it for me. My brother's made a 6-year career of it, 7 years now, I guess. It's just I remember my first day putting on an NFL uniform, first game, and coincidentally we played the Patriots in the preseason. And wearing an NFL uniform was just, it's like the pinnacle. It's like achieving everything you ever dreamed of. And I've been fortunate. I've gotten to do that a couple of times. You know, I got to play at the University of Iowa, which was what I grew up dreaming of. I wanted to run on that swarm, and then I got a chance to do that, and then I got a chance to play and actually be a contributing member of the team, and then all of a sudden now you're in the NFL, and it is surreal. But the other part of it, it was a little bit of a disappointment to me, honestly, because, and I would imagine it's probably different for guys that are chasing Olympic gold medals. In the National Football League, it's a job and it's business, and it's a great job because you get to play football every day. But a lot of the aspects of the team sport that I'm really fond of, or that I love so much being a part of, unfortunately for me, the rosters I was on in the NFL, we didn't have that. And, you know, it was like a bunch of mercenaries, and that's okay, you know, but it just becomes very different. And there's a competitive aspect to pro sports, where if the roster's not managed right, I'll hit on that in a second, but you know, it's just, hey, look, I'm there trying to take somebody's job. I'm trying to take food off their table. I'm 23 years old. Some of these guys are 32, have wife, have kids, have a family. And it makes for a very interesting dynamic.
Wow.
Now, I was very much disappointed walking out of there. But I'll tell you one thing that I'm very fortunate is that experience I had in New England, my 4 years in New England, I got to be around an NFL team where all the things I didn't think could exist in pro sports did. And it really changed my outlook. And again, the teams I was on weren't very good, which also is difficult. I was used to being on good teams. And the New England Patriots are excellent. And it has a lot to do with having good players.
Yeah. But
you cannot discount the culture or the togetherness of a football team. That is a very important thing. And I don't think it's any different in wrestling. You know,
right.
you referenced, look, I'm up to date on our guys. I'm not always as good with the rest of the country, but one thing that strikes me about our team, those are a bunch of kids that are very much invested in the success of one another. And I think that is what helps you overachieve. And, you know, I'm in awe of what Cale Sanderson and those guys have done at Penn State. But another thing that strikes me about watching Penn State wrestle, as much as it pains me because they're not Iowa, you can't watch them wrestle and say that is not a group of people that care about each other and are having a blast. That's one thing that always strikes me about those guys. They have such unique individual styles, and they're all having fun.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty special too. Now, I mean, look, I just want to see guys throw guys in the score table and start brawls. But I was raised in Iowa City. I don't know any better.
Amen, man. I mean, God, you're talking about some Iowa, Penn State. I was there this year. That was an awesome duel. Did you make it out to that one this year, Coach?
I was there for that one. Yeah.
God, that was electric. You think
Yeah.
back to the time we're in now, live sports, it's like you take it for granted. And, you know, I definitely have a lot more gratitude for sports now that we're, you know, without it. What does it look like for you guys? You mentioned that you're coming up on a date where you got to start getting your guys in shape. Can you have any contact with them? I mean, what are you doing at all right now, football wise?
Yeah, we're in contact with those guys. You know, the hardest part for us as a program is these 15 spring practices that we're missing. This is a developmental block of time for us, where we're really working on skill development, team development, and toughness development. You know, that deep water. This is the time of year when we're trying to push guys into it and teach them how to swim. So we're missing that. That's not going to come back. We're not going to lament that. There's also I would say for the University of Iowa, this time is much more about fundamentals and physical development. So skill development, much more than system implementation or anything like that. So what we've done right now, obviously we can't train the guys. We can't practice. First and foremost, we want to make sure everybody's healthy and doing their part to keep the rest of our country healthy. So we have about 35 guys who the best answer was to be back in Iowa City in their apartments. We have one freshman who had to move into an apartment because the dorms closed. Everyone else on our roster is home. And so, what we do is we meet with the players once or twice per week, like by Zoom, which I've had to learn more about all this stuff. And it's good for me. So by Zoom. But when we do those meetings, it's a lot more about just making sure guys are in a routine, making sure guys are staying on top of their academics, because that's new to these guys. That's a new challenge, online classes. So just trying to check in and build that sense of community that we normally have. We do that by position groups. We also have some different groups within our team. We call it the Hawkeye Challenge, where it works across offense, defense, position groups. They meet weekly with a coach. We try to call each guy with a phone call once or twice per week. And basically our message right now is just, hey, one day we'll start again. I don't know when that's going to be. I don't think that's important right now to worry about. I think what we need to do is make sure we're doing the best thing we can for everyone. But when that day comes, we need to get everybody to that day and get them there. Guys are working out, doing the best they can, but it's like where you're at. We have a lot of players from the Chicagoland area and from Illinois who can't go down and run at a high school field right now. It's illegal. So just conditioning. We drop ship dumbbells and kettlebells and equipment to guys, but it's one thing to be able to go train in your garage. It's another thing to be able to go out and run. Our guys need to run. And some guys can't do that right now, and that's okay. So when we get to that point, we just got to make sure everybody gets there, that they've done what they need to do academically, that physically they're in as good a shape as they can be. They're not going to be ready to practice. That's okay. We'll get there. But whenever that date comes, it goes back to that wrestling mentality. To me, I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't care. I know that we're going to have challenges that we've never faced before. We're going to have a time frame that we've probably never seen before. And it's not going to be fair, right? Like, there's a lot of guys right now. We have a lot of coaches bitching about, well, certain guys got X amount of spring practices in, and these, is it all going to be the same? Is it going to be equitable? I could care less. It doesn't matter. We get the date. We got to get a football team ready to play. If we don't win, nobody's going to care that there was COVID-19 and a coronavirus crisis and quarantine. Nobody's going to be interested. They're going to be interested in the fact that we lost. So we need to find a way to compete. And I think it all comes back to this. Again, this is a lesson I learned in wrestling. Try to reiterate this to our guys all the time. Everything you do, the way you live your life, you're competing against your opponent. And in football, it's a preparation battle. I think it's a preparation battle in every sport.
Yeah.
But in football, it's a preparation battle. So, I kid with our guys, but like, if you're going to take a shit, finish it and do it better than your opponents do. And have that mindset. Take that mindset to everything you do, whether it's waking up on time to eat breakfast, putting the proper amount of calories in your body, putting the proper nutrition in your body, getting 8 hours of sleep. It's a game. You're preparing and you're competing against somebody. You can't see them, but they're there.
Yeah.
I see this the same way. We're competing against 129 other Division I football programs. The teams that are going to win this fall are going to handle this the best. Our job is to handle it the best. And is it challenging? Yeah, it's challenging. That's why we compete. It's fun.
Yeah.
So, let's make sure we're doing what we can to be safe. When we play again, let's be ready to play. But my advice, and I read this stuff, some of these coaches are just saying things that make us all look stupid and bad. Let's take care of the country first.
Yeah.
Let's make sure we're taking care of to me, any unnecessary death is just tragic and it's sad. And we should be doing everything we can to avoid it. And then when it is safe to reopen the country, let's go play football. Let's wrestle.
Yeah.
Let's play golf. Let's do all the things we're going to do. Time is, I've learned this. It's taken me a long time. All right. So I just turned 37 and I'm gaining some perspective. I'm trying to do better every year. But one thing that the last 5 years has really dawned on me, time is just this linear form of measurement that is unstoppable. It just continues to move. And I think the difficulty is finding perspective within that time. We all get in we're self-centered by nature. We can't help it. But we worry so much about our circumstance and what's happening to us right now. And the reality is, whether you're in a wrestling room, sweating your ass off through the final 5 minutes of conditioning and practice, or you're out in the real world trying to deal with some of the challenges everyone's facing right now, this too shall pass. You will come out on the other side. And if you don't, you won't know anyway. That's always how I thought about the last 5 minutes of wrestling practice was, either I'm going to get through this or I'm not, but I won't be around it won't be my problem.
Right.
So, I just think we could all take a step back and look at time and just say that, if you say that, hey, 6 months, a year, whatever with sports, it ends up being, that's just a blip on the radar.
It really is.
That's just a blip on the radar.
Yeah, you look at, I was telling my mom's a nurse in DeWitt, Iowa, but I was even telling her, I go, in World War II, they didn't have sports for 2 or 3 years. Like, if this lasts 3 years, that still ain't shit. It's like, we'll be back, and then a year after that, we'll forget it even happened. So let's hope to God that's not the case, mainly for all the small businesses out there and folks who are like restaurant workers and that kind of thing. But last thing I want to ask you, Coach, before I let you go is, you've answered a lot of, like, usually the last question is, how did wrestling change your life? And you've said a lot to that and what you look for in guys and how it's impacted you and your coaching philosophy. You've also been around some of the greatest coaches in the world, Hayden Fry, your dad, Belichick. You've been around Tom Brady. You've been around all these guys. So this might be a little bit tough, but pick one who's the greatest mentor to you, and how has that person changed your life?
Well, that's a great question. It's twofold. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. I know I hit a couple of times earlier because it's on the front of my mind right now. Just some things have crystallized for me watching people over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and then just a couple of documentaries I watched and some books. And
what documentaries have you watched? I'm a junkie on documentaries.
Well, yeah. So here's my favorite thing to do right now is go through the old 30 for 30s.
Oh,
it's
my God.
Favorite thing to do. Those are the best.
The best.
So, just thinking about those things and you ask who's had the greatest impact on my life. I mean, it has to be my father. It has to be my dad. But I look through, all those people that you mentioned, whether it's Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Hayden Fry, but go down the list, and just in the wrestling community, Dan Gable, Tom Brands, those names in Iowa. We've been very fortunate as a football program. The Bannock brothers have somewhat of a relationship with our football program, and being around those three guys has just been tremendous. Steve is actually the guy's closest to us, who is the least famous.
Yep.
In the wrestling community, but in the real world, quite famous. Went on to a distinguished military career.
Yeah.
And so being around, in fact, has he ever been on your program?
No, but his brother has, and he always talks about Stevie. I'm like, who is Steve? He's like, he went to Lehigh, but transferred to Iowa, then went on to be in the military. I should have him on, though.
You should. He's unbelievable. One of the most intelligent people I've ever been around, and basically kicked Ed and Lou's ass into doing the right things. That's why they talk about him that way.
We'll have to sync up on him afterwards. I'd love to have him on.
Absolutely. He's awesome. And, you just think about all these people, and it's, to me, humility is the thing they all have in common. Tom Brady's one of the most humble people I've ever been around.
No kidding.
Yeah. First day I met him, he walked up to me and said, "Hey, hi, my name's Tom." I said, "Yeah, no shit. Like, I know who you are." But that's how these guys are, and I think that comes from experience, and it ties back to what you're talking about on this podcast all the time. You have to learn that. It's a learned quality.
Mm-hmm.
And, I look at my dad, one thing that I say in every production meeting. So every Saturday, we're on TV. That's one nice thing about our business.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of exposure, right? So every Friday we do a production meeting. And so the coordinators and the head coach have to meet with whatever broadcast crew is doing the game. So in the course of a year, we play 12 games, 13 games of the bowl game. We're probably going to have 5-6 different broadcast crews. Sometimes we have some repeats. They all ask the same question every Saturday. What's it like to coach, or every Friday in the meeting, what's it like to coach with your dad? Right? Like, and I finally tell them, I'm like, hey, listen, so now I've been sitting in these meetings. I've been a coordinator 3 years. I've been sitting in these meetings 3 years. I've played for my dad. I've coached with my dad. I've had plenty of media availability in all that time. And so now I just say, what an original question. You guys are not the first people to ever ask me this.
Yeah. Up your game, guys. Come on.
Yeah, no kidding, right? So it's a little obvious. But what I've tried to do is develop a better answer. Because I don't know what the answer is. I think people are always looking for some fun anecdote, or, it's like whatever it is to go to work with them every day. I'll tell you what it's like to coach for my dad. And I think this would be true for every assistant on our staff. And I'm always a little uncomfortable saying it because he's my dad. So it sounds self-serving, or like my dad can beat up your dad. And which is not the case, because I'll tell you the greatest thing about growing up in my house, playing football for my dad and then coaching for him. I got to know him as a father. I got to know him as a coach. And then early in my coaching career, when I was off doing other things, I got to know him as a mentor. And then working with him, I got to know him as a coworker. And along the line, I learned a lot more about him as a human being. And I think that's the hardest thing about growing up. I worry about that often with my kids. One day, right, all my kids are under the age of 7. So I'm a hero. I'm the greatest. I do no wrong. If I walked in and told them the sky was purple, they would believe me.
Yeah.
And which is tremendous responsibility, I'm learning. But you grow up one day and you meet your parents as people. And I think that's a really hard transition as you move into adulthood. And you learn that your parents aren't mom and dad. They're people just like the rest of us. They have flaws. They have weaknesses. And they've done things they're not proud of. Right. And one thing that I'm very fortunate about, or fortunate to have, is I go to work every day with a guy who is a human being. Yeah, he has flaws. He has weaknesses. We argue about them often. I have no flaws or weaknesses, so I win all the arguments. But I go there with him every day, and yeah, he is a human being. But I'll tell you one thing about him that I just respect, and I think it transcends football, but it's very similar to Bill Belichick or Tom Brady or any of the people you mentioned. I think it has a lot to do with their success. I've never seen him. He's the most genuine person I've ever seen, and he cares about everyone. And everyone is important to him, and he treats them as such. Whether it's a custodian in our building, which we have 4 of them, he knows every one of them by name. He knows their stories. He knows where they're from. And when he says hi to them, it's when no one's looking. It's not because we're watching him. It's we catch him. And he has a conversation, and there's a moment of genuine connection. And it's every person in our building, from freshmen in our program to our medical staff, to the custodial staff, like I mentioned, the secretarial staff, go down the list. When you care about people and you treat them like they matter, it's amazing the performance that gets generated. And Bill Belichick, I know he doesn't seem that way, and he has a very different style than my dad. I'll never forget being a young person in that building, being a young gopher type worker, and feeling like my job was important and it was valued. And that's a powerful thing. And I think that gets lost a lot of places. You mentioned Hayden Fry. We went down to Coach Fry's memorial service. We flew. We were very fortunate. CRST Trucking provided a plane to fly us down there, the athletic department contingent, so we could get in and out. Sick world. We had recruiting that morning. But we get down there, and the pilot sent me a nice email afterwards just talking about my father. He goes, just please pass this along to him. I fly, business people and important people and dignitaries. And he said people basically fall into 3 categories. That's how he saw them at that station in life. Either they've achieved that and everyone is beneath them and they don't even try to hide it, or they try to feign it. They try to make that connection, but you can tell they're preoccupied.
Yeah.
with whatever's going on in their own world, and rightfully so, right?
Yeah.
These are important people. Or the third category, you said, which your dad is in, genuine, caring people that couldn't even fake it if they tried because they know. And so he's made as big an impact on my life as anybody for a multitude of reasons. But I wake up every morning, I go to work trying to be more like him.
Yeah.
And I think the hardest thing, I tell this to those broadcast crews, this is my long story that I've come to entertain them. But I tell them, I said, the hardest thing about coaching with my father is knowing every morning when you wake up that no matter how hard you work at or how much you try, you won't measure up to what he is. And that's hard for me personally. But I look at it again, it's like growing up in a bunch of different places, look at it however you want. Yeah, it's too bad I'm never going to quite live up to my father. But boy, was I lucky to be born to him, because we don't get to pick our parents. So
right.
I just feel fortunate every day. He's been the biggest mentor in my life, and I would anticipate that to continue. And it's like in recruiting, I get asked all the time, when's he going to retire? Well, hopefully not anytime soon, because I still have a lot to learn from him. So if he stops working, I'm in deep shit.
Man, that's so funny. That's the biggest thing that pops up when you put in your name. Is he going to take over? Is he going to take over? And I'm like, I don't even really care about the answer, but I'm just like, I thought it was funny that you said, you're like, I got a lot more to learn. And so I just thought that was a cool little thing you said. And that was very touching. And I know exactly what you mean. Like when you talk to someone, you look them in the eye when you talk to them, and you actually like listen and actually have a genuine question back. That's something that I think people in business or in coaching, whatever field in life, that's a common trait. Before I let you go, I got to ask you, what's your favorite 30 for 30? Because I'm a junkie on the 30 for 30s.
So, okay. So, I have a couple. You have to categorize them, right? Are you talking about like the multi-episode ones or just the single? Because
not the multi-episode. That's different. Yeah, single episode.
Yeah, my favorite single episode is Winning Time, the Reggie Miller and Spike Lee, the 94 Knicks Pacers deal. I love that one.
That's the one I haven't watched that one. Oh, I'm excited.
You need to watch that one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
I do. So I do these interviews, but I also do audio documentaries. So think of it like a 30 for 30, but a podcast. And so I did a 2-part series on Gable. I'll send it to you.
Okay. Yeah,
if you like wrestling, you'll like it. But so I watch these 30 for 30s to get inspiration. I'm obsessed with the Bad Boys one right now. Have you watched that?
Oh, it's a great one. Yeah, that's a great one.
Great one. And
that's great twofold, because it's got Jordan, going back into the weight room.
Right.
Like Jordan saying, forget it, I'm going to find a way to beat these guys.
Right.
And that's, I appreciate them, because again, like I like guys getting thrown on the scores table, but
yeah.
But I also appreciate that one of Jordan, because that's, like everybody asked the basketball deal, right? And it's funny on a wrestling podcast, why would you bring up the greatest basketball player of all time? But that's such the argument between generations. And like my father, he would tell you Bill Russell is the greatest of all time.
Right.
And, for me, it's Jordan, because that's who I grew up with.
Of course.
And for everybody now, it is, LeBron. And I get that. So I asked a guy named Luke Recker, who played basketball at Iowa, transferred from Indiana. I asked him one time, he lives in town. I forget where we were, but I asked him, I said, hey, I got to ask you, he had played with both of them in a summer league, right? Like Luke played overseas, but he was in a summer league one time, played on the same court as both those guys, Jordan and LeBron.
Wow.
I said, settle it for me. Like, who's the best? He goes, listen, LeBron is the greatest player of all. He's an unbelievable athlete, skilled player. He said, but in a one-on-one game, Jordan would find a way to win. He goes, and that's what makes Jordan special. He would find a way to beat him, because that's the kind of competitor he is. Man. He said, so LeBron may be the greatest player of all time, but in basketball, Jordan's the greatest competitor of all time. So as good as the Bad Boys one, which it is phenomenal. But I love the scene of Jordan, like going back into the weight room and getting bigger and stronger and saying, I'm not going to get pushed around.
I know. I get chills when they flash. They're like, the Pistons had the Bulls, and there's Jordan. You're like, holy shit, that was that time. Yeah. And hopefully the ESPN releases that documentary they've been teasing us with for years called The Last Dance. Like, when the hell is that coming out? I think it's this week, maybe even, or next week.
I know it's this month.
Gotta be.
We've actually, my wife already set the TiVo for it. So
she's a saint.
DVR or whatever it is. She is.
Well, Coach, thank you very much for your time. It's been an honor, sir. I hope you have a great day.
Likewise, Ryan. Thank you.
Take care. And all great things must come to an end. If you want to hear more from the podcast, text WRESTLE to 555-888. That's wrestle to 555-888. You can also find us on Instagram, Wrestling Changed My Life, Twitter, Ryan_N_Warner, as well as our website, WrestlingChangedMyLife.com. Take care, y'all. Calm. 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 Take care, y'all. Calm.